but I'll be fine.
I don't know, man.
I can't tell you that, sweetheart.
I got you, Spider! What the hell, Frank? You just hit me with a beer! Frank!
Move it, Dave.
Get out of the vehicle, ma'am. Keep her for questioning. Clearing the building.
You can see me. You forgot to ask yourself a very important question.
Hey, good job. I'm here. I don't know. Hi, this is not related.
It seems so. I didn't see that you looked at anyone.
I've seen it.
But the Avengers are focusing. I actually think it's probably more related to the attack today. There was a cross-agency cybersecurity.
Just damage control myself. Hi, I got an appointment with,
Director, my face covering will result in defensive measure.
As far as mostly research has made them dangerous, turning them into a valuable part of our security is to redirect destructive energy into something useful. Or protecting the most important. I believe you understand. You're the only one who's immune to it. You know, we're...
That sounds super illegal, Spider-Man.
The scream came from 40 floors above the street. Spider-Man looked up just as a man crashed through an office window, glittering shards falling around him like frozen rain. Peter fired a web, missed, fired again. The strand caught the man's ankle 3 feet before his skull met the pavement. For one breathless second, everything stopped. Then the crowd erupted. Phones rose. People cheered Spider-Man's name. Peter lowered the trembling stranger onto an ambulance roof, gave the paramedics a silent nod, and disappeared between the buildings before anyone could thank him. That was easier now. Saving strangers was simple. Letting them know him was the dangerous part. 4 years had passed since the world forgot Peter Parker. His apartment was smaller, colder, and almost empty. One mattress, one chair. A police scanner balanced beside an unpaid electricity bill. On the wall hung a photograph turned face down, because looking at MJ and Ned hurt more than any broken bone. Every morning, Peter woke before sunrise, pulled the mask over his face, and became someone New York still remembered. Every night, he returned as a ghost. No messages, no missed calls, no one waiting. Sometimes he whispered his own name just to hear another human voice say it. That evening, the scanner reported an armed robbery near Queens. Peter swung across the river, rain striking his suit hard enough to sound like fingertips tapping against glass. He landed behind 3 masked thieves loading experimental equipment into a van. "Guys, the late-night science shopping thing feels suspicious." One thief fired. Peter twisted aside, webbed the weapon away, and dropped the others within seconds. Too easy. But the final robber stood perfectly still, staring beyond Peter with wide, terrified eyes. "It followed us," the man whispered. Peter's spider sense exploded. He ducked. Something invisible tore through the van behind him, metal folded like paper. Peter fired webs in every direction. 2 strands struck nothing. A third wrapped around something shaped like a human arm, then snapped. Heavy footsteps dented the wet pavement, moving toward him without a body to cast them. Peter punched empty air and felt his knuckles connect with something solid. A sound answered him. Not a growl, not a voice. More like several people gasping through the same throat. Then the presence vanished. Silence. Peter stood beneath the flickering streetlight, rainwater running from his mask. The arrested robber began laughing, softly at first, then harder. You can't fight what you can't see. The next morning, Peter watched MJ through the window of a crowded cafe near Columbia. She looked older, happier maybe. Ned sat across from her, excitedly explaining something with both hands while she laughed into her coffee. Peter's fingers tightened around the folded note inside his pocket. He had rewritten it 12 times. My name is Peter Parker. We used to be friends. You once made me promise I would find you. Simple words. Impossible words. He stepped toward the door. MJ suddenly glanced up, and their eyes met through the glass. Something shifted in her expression. Recognition? No. Just the polite uncertainty reserved for strangers. Peter walked away before she could look again. That night, pain woke him on the floor. His back arched, every muscle locked at once. Heat raced beneath his skin, crawling from his chest into his arms like burning wires. He tore off his shirt and stumbled toward the mirror. Dark lines moved beneath his flesh, spreading outward from the faded spider bite on his wrist. His fingertips pressed against the sink and sank into the porcelain. Peter pulled back, breathing fast. The sink cracked down the middle. In the mirror, his pupils narrowed until almost nothing remained. For one horrifying second, he could hear everything. Rats scratching inside walls, conversations 3 buildings away, blood rushing through the veins of the man sleeping upstairs. Then came the heartbeat that wasn't human. Slow, heavy, close. Peter spun toward the window. Nothing stood on the fire escape, yet rain bent around the outline of a tall figure. Water traced invisible shoulders, an invisible head, and one raised hand pressed against the glass. Peter's spider sense screamed, but his body refused to move. A thin crack spread beneath the unseen fingertips. From somewhere inside the empty shape, a voice whispered his name. Not Spider-Man. Peter Parker. The window shattered inward. Peter threw himself aside as an invisible force entered the room. It moved past him without attacking, stopping beside the face-down photograph. The picture lifted from the table by itself. MJ and Ned stared upward from another life, smiling beside a boy the universe had erased. Peter reached for his mask. The unseen creature slowly turned the photograph around. Across the glass, 3 words had been carved from the inside. They remember you. Peter fired a web at the photograph. The frame snapped from the invisible creature's grip and flew into his hand. At the same instant, something struck him across the chest. He crashed through the table, splinters biting into his back. The room went black. No power, no street light, only rain and that impossible heartbeat moving through the darkness. Peter closed his eyes. Sight was useless. He listened instead. Floorboards creaked near the window. A drop of water hit the carpet. Then another. The creature was circling him, waiting. Peter tightened his fingers around the photograph. You know who I am, he said. So tell me who sent you. A cold hand closed around his throat. Peter slammed both feet forward and felt the creature hit the wall. Plaster burst outward, briefly coating an enormous human shape in white dust, broad shoulders, long arms, a face with no features. Peter lunged, but the figure dissolved before his fist landed. Then its voice came from everywhere at once. You made the world forget. You thought forgetting meant gone. The walls vibrated. Memories do not die, Peter. They rot. A sharp pressure pierced the side of his neck. Peter cried out and ripped himself free, but something had already entered his bloodstream. Black veins spread beneath his skin. His knees buckled. The creature stepped through the shattered window and vanished into the rain. Peter woke 3 hours later beneath the wreckage. Dawn bled through the broken glass. His fever was gone, but the dark lines remained, curling around his ribs like roots. He tried calling Dr. Strange. The number no longer worked. He searched for Wong, the Sanctum, anyone connected to magic, but every path ended in silence. Whatever spell had erased him had also erased his right to ask for help. Peter stared at MJ's picture. They remember you. Who was they? MJ and Ned? His enemies? Or something trapped outside the spell, watching from the dark? The police scanner crackled. Multiple attacks. Midtown. Victims alive but unresponsive. Peter pulled on his suit and swung toward the sirens. He found 6 people standing motionless in Times Square, surrounded by ambulances and frightened officers. Their eyes were open. Their lips moved, but no sound came out. Each victim held something personal. A wedding ring, a child's toy, an old photograph. Peter landed behind the barricade. A detective raised his weapon. "Back off, Spider-Man!" Peter froze. He knew that voice. Detective Yuri Watanabe stepped beneath the flashing lights. She looked exhausted, harder than Peter remembered. A scar crossed the side of her jaw. Her gun remained aimed at his chest. "You have 10 seconds to explain why witnesses saw you at 3 attack sites." Peter stared at her. "I wasn't at 3 attack sites." Yuri tossed a phone onto the hood of a squad car. The screen showed security footage from Brooklyn. Spider-Man stood inside a dark apartment while a woman collapsed at his feet. Another clip showed him leaving a subway car filled with unconscious passengers. The suit was identical. The movements weren't. Too slow. Too deliberate. Like something had learned his shape but not his soul. "Someone's wearing my face?" Peter said. Yuri gave a bitter laugh. "That excuse works better when your face isn't a mask." One of the victims suddenly screamed. The sound tore through the square. Every screen around them flickered at once. Advertisements vanished, replaced by shaky footage of Peter standing outside MJ's cafe that morning. His face was uncovered. His name appeared beneath the image in white letters. Peter Parker. Peter stopped breathing. People turned toward the screens, confused. Yuri looked from the footage to Spider-Man, but before recognition could settle, the image distorted. Peter's face stretched into static. His name scrambled into meaningless symbols. The spell was fighting back. Every screen exploded in sparks. The 6 victims collapsed together, gasping as if surfacing from deep water. One grabbed Peter's wrist with terrifying strength. "It knows what you sacrificed," the man whispered. Peter crouched beside him. "What knows?" The victim's eyes filled with tears. "The thing beneath the city." Then his memory vanished. His expression emptied. He looked at Peter like they had never spoken. Yuri ordered officers to seal the area, but Peter was already moving. He followed a trail only his senses could detect, a metallic scent beneath the rain, mixed with something old and burned. It led through alleys, across rooftops, down into an abandoned subway tunnel sealed since the blip. The deeper he went, the louder the second heartbeat became. Graffiti covered the walls, hundreds of names written over one another. Some belonged to people Peter had saved. Others belonged to people he had failed. At the tunnel's end stood a steel door covered in webbing, his webbing. Peter touched one strand. It was dry, brittle, years old. He had never been here. At least, he didn't remember being here. Behind the door, someone knocked 3 times. A familiar voice followed. "Peter?" His hand went numb. It was Aunt May. Peter's hand hovered over the steel door. Every nerve in his body screamed that the voice was impossible. Aunt May was gone. He had held her as the life left her eyes. He had heard her last words through smoke, sirens, and shattered glass. Nothing could change that. "Peter!" The voice called again, weaker now. "Please!" His fingers closed around the handle. The door opened into darkness. A single hospital bed stood beneath a hanging light. Aunt May sat on its edge, wearing the same blood-stained coat from the night she died. Her face looked pale but warm, alive. Peter forgot how to breathe. She smiled. "There you are." His knees nearly gave out. For one fragile second, he was 17 again. Coming home late and inventing excuses while she pretended not to notice the bruises. He wanted to cross the room. He wanted to fall into her arms and let the whole broken world disappear. But her feet cast no shadow. Peter stepped back. The smile remained, yet something inside it changed. Too still, too perfect. "You're not her." May lowered her eyes. "You always were clever." The room flickered. The bed vanished. The walls became black stone threaded with glowing cracks. May remained in the center, but the darkness behind her moved like breathing flesh. Peter raised his fists. "What are you?" "I am what the spell left behind." Her voice deepened, layered with dozens of whispers. Images flashed across the walls. MJ crying beside a hospital window, Ned searching through old photographs, Happy standing at May's grave beside a stranger he could not remember. Each memory trembled like a reflection on water. Peter's chest tightened. The creature had found the wound he never touched. When the world forgot Peter Parker, it said, the memories were not destroyed. They were torn out, buried. Millions of empty spaces, each carrying pain with no name. May's face cracked down the middle. Black smoke poured from the opening. I grew inside those spaces. Peter fired both webs. They wrapped around the creature, pulling it forward as its borrowed skin peeled away. Beneath May's face was a shifting body made from fragments. Eyes, mouths, hands, all appearing and disappearing beneath a surface of living shadow. Peter yanked hard and drove his shoulder into its chest. The impact sent them through the stone wall and into an underground chamber filled with suspended glass spheres. Thousands of them. Each one held a moving memory. Peter saw himself and Ned building a model Death Star. MJ leaning against him on a rooftop. May laughing in the kitchen. Tony Stark placing a hand on his shoulder. His entire life floated around him. The creature slammed him onto the floor. One sphere shattered. A memory rushed into Peter's body so violently that he screamed. He stood in May's apartment while she placed a bowl of soup in front of him, the smell of garlic, the hum of the refrigerator. Her fingers brushing his hair away from a healing cut. He had forgotten that moment. Not because of magic, because grief had buried it. Then it was gone. Peter curled on the ground, clutching his chest. The creature watched him with May's eyes. You abandoned them, it whispered. You chose loneliness and called it protection. Peter forced himself upright. I kept them safe. You kept yourself safe. The word struck harder than the blow. He saw MJ through the cafe window, the note in his pocket, his feet turning away before she could reject him. He saw every night he had hidden behind the mask because Spider-Man could be loved without Peter Parker ever taking the risk. The creature moved closer. You are not alone because the spell demanded it. You are alone because fear did. Peter's jaw tightened, but he could not deny it. Then one of the spheres behind the creature began to shake. Inside it, Ned stood in a dark room drawing the same symbol again and again. A circle split by 3 jagged lines. He looked terrified. Across the room, MJ stared at a photograph she should not remember. Peter stepped toward the sphere. What is that? The creature turned too late. Peter smashed the glass. The memory exploded outward. Suddenly he stood inside Ned's mind. Ned was asleep, trapped in a nightmare. A shadow wearing Spider-Man's face stood above his bed, pressing 2 fingers against his forehead. MJ was there too, screaming Peter's name, even though she did not know why. Then another figure appeared behind them. A man in a dark tactical coat. His left arm gleamed with metal. He fired at the shadow, forcing it away. Peter knew that face from old news footage. A soldier blamed for murders he did not commit. A man the world called the Winter Soldier. The memory collapsed. Peter fell back into the chamber, gasping. The creature shrieked. Every glass sphere began cracking at once. Voices flooded the room. Millions of forgotten moments begging to return. Peter looked up. The creature was no longer wearing Aunt May's face. Now it wore his. And behind it, embedded deep within the black stone, something enormous opened its eyes. The creature smiled with Peter's mouth. You found the door, it said, but you still don't know who opened it. The stone eyes opened wider. A pressure wave tore through the chamber, shattering every remaining memory sphere. Peter covered his head as a lifetime of stolen moments flooded the air. Birthday candles, hospital rooms, first kisses, final goodbyes. Thousands of voices overlapped until the sound became unbearable. The shadow wearing Peter's face stretched its arms toward the giant buried beneath the wall. Wake up, it whispered. Gunfire answered. 3 rounds struck the creature's chest, each bullet flashing blue before exploding into white light. The shadow twisted backward. Peter looked toward the tunnel entrance. Bucky Barnes stood there, metal arm raised, smoke curling from the barrel of his pistol. Move! Peter jumped as the stone floor split open. A black hand erupted from beneath him, fingers large enough to crush a subway car. Bucky fired again while Peter webbed the ceiling and swung across the chamber. The buried thing dragged itself forward, breaking through layers of rock. It had no true face, only hundreds of human expressions pressed into a skull of darkness. Bucky pulled a small device from his coat and slammed it against the wall. A pulse of energy rippled through the chamber. The creature screamed. Every stolen face vanished except Peter's. "You came back," it hissed at Bucky. "Yeah," Bucky said. "Bad habit." Peter landed beside him. "You know what that thing is?" Bucky's eyes remained fixed on the shadow. "I know what it does." He tossed Peter a thin metal disc marked with the same symbol Ned had drawn. The moment Peter caught it, his fingertips burned. 3 months ago, people connected to the Avengers started losing memories, Bucky said. Not ordinary memories, specific ones, battles, names, identities. Someone was collecting everything the world had been forced to forget. Peter looked at the disc. Someone? Bucky finally faced him. Dr. Stephen Strange. Silence. Peter gave a sharp, disbelieving laugh. Strange made the spell to protect everyone. He made the spell, Bucky said. Then he discovered something inside it. The shadow attacked. Its arm became a blade. Peter blocked the strike with both forearms, but the impact threw him into a stone pillar. Bucky grabbed the creature from behind, metal fingers digging into its neck. For 1 second, he held it. Then the shadow whispered a sequence of Russian words. Bucky froze. His face emptied. The creature turned and pressed a hand against his forehead. Images burst from him. Snow, blood, a red book, bodies falling beneath the Winter Soldier's hands. Bucky dropped to one knee, breathing like a man drowning inside his own past. Peter charged. He punched through the shadow's chest and felt something beating inside. Not a heart, a memory. He pulled. A glowing fragment tore free, showing Strange standing alone beneath the sanctum, drawing symbols across a circular stone door. His hands shook. Blood ran from his nose. Behind him stood another figure hidden by a hood. Strange spoke without turning. Once Peter Parker is erased, the barrier will weaken. The hooded figure asked, "And the boy?" Strange closed his eyes. He'll never know. The memory shattered in Peter's hands. His stomach dropped. The spell had not been an accident. His sacrifice had opened something. The shadow struck him across the face, then seized the metal disc. Bucky recovered just long enough to grab its wrist. "Peter," he shouted, "the symbol is a lock. Break the center." Peter fired a web, yanked the disc back, and crushed it between his palms. A flash swallowed the chamber. The giant beneath the wall roared as chains of golden light appeared around its body. The shadow began tearing apart, pieces of Peter's face peeling into smoke. But it smiled. Too late. Above them, somewhere in Manhattan, church bells began ringing. One bell, then another, then hundreds. Peter's spider sense ignited with such force that he screamed. Across New York, people stopped walking. They turned toward the same unseen point beneath the city. MJ dropped her coffee. Ned woke from his nightmare. Yuri lowered her weapon, and every one of them whispered the same forgotten name. Peter Parker! Bucky stared at him in horror. The spell was breaking. Then Peter's phone rang. The caller had no number. He answered. Dr. Strange's voice came through the speaker, weak and desperate. "Peter, listen carefully. Whatever you do!" A violent impact shook the tunnel. "Do not let them remember you." Dr. Strange's warning died beneath a roar of collapsing stone. Peter grabbed Bucky and fired 2 webs toward the tunnel ceiling. They swung clear as the floor split open, revealing a golden light pulsing far below the city. Not fire, not electricity, a spell. Massive circles of symbols rotated beneath Manhattan like gears inside a buried clock. Bucky looked down. "What happens if they remember you?" Peter tightened his grip on the web. "I don't know." That was the problem. The spell had erased Peter Parker to stop the multiverse from tearing open. If millions of memories returned at once, every person who had ever known him could become a crack in reality. Above them, New York began to remember. MJ stood inside the cafe with one hand over her mouth. Images slammed into her without warning. Peter laughing on a rooftop. Peter bleeding beneath the Statue of Liberty. Peter promising to find her. Her coffee cup slipped from her fingers. Ned collapsed beside his bed as forgotten years flooded back. Every joke, every secret, every time Peter had needed him. Across the city, smaller memories followed. Teachers remembered a quiet student missing from every class photograph. Nurses remembered treating a wounded boy whose name had vanished from the forms. Happy Hogan stood before May's grave and suddenly saw Peter beside him, grief-stricken and alone. The spell trembled. Buildings flickered. For half a second, The Chrysler Building appeared broken in two. The sky above Queens turned purple. A train passed through Times Square, carrying passengers from another universe, then vanished before anyone could scream. Peter felt every distortion through his spider sense. 1,000 needles beneath his skin. Strange's voice returned through the phone. The spell is rebuilding the connections it severed. Each memory is pulling on another reality where Peter Parker still exists. Then fix it, Peter shouted. I can't. The answer came too quickly. Peter landed on a fractured platform and pulled Bucky beside him. You knew this could happen. I knew it was possible, Strange said. That creature is forcing the memories back faster than the spell can contain them. What creature? A pause. The Remnant. The name echoed through the chamber. Strange explained that every erased memory had left behind magical residue. Regret, love, grief, millions of human emotions with nowhere to go. The Remnant had fed on them, growing stronger until it became conscious. But Peter heard the fear beneath Strange's voice. There was more. You opened the door, Peter said. Strange went silent. Bucky watched him carefully. Peter's jaw tightened. I saw the memory. The spell required a place to store what was removed. Strange finally admitted. I created a vault beneath the city. You put everyone's memories down here? I thought the vault was empty. A laugh rolled through the tunnel. The Remnant stepped from the wall behind them, wearing MJ's face. You never checked? Peter turned. The creature now looked almost human, rain-dark hair, small scar above one eyebrow. Even the necklace Peter had given MJ rested against its throat. It smiled exactly as she did. Peter's hands curled into fists. Take her face off. The Remnant tilted its head. Why? You abandoned the real one. It touched the stone wall. The tunnel disappeared. Peter stood inside the cafe. MJ faced him from across the room, tears running down her cheeks. Around them, customers remained frozen in place. Peter, she whispered. He stepped toward her, unsure whether she was real. Her hand touched his cheek, warm. I remember everything. His throat closed. He had imagined those words every night for years. He had imagined relief, joy, maybe forgiveness. Instead, fear filled her eyes. You left me. Peter's face tightened. I was protecting you. You decided for me. Ned appeared beside her. His expression hurt more than anger. We were your family. Peter looked between them. You were safer without me. No, Ned said. You were safer without us. The cafe walls began to bleed darkness. The Remnant's voice slipped through their mouths. Stay here, Peter. Let them remember. Let them love you again. For 1 second, he wanted to surrender. No more empty apartment. No more watching through windows. No more saying his own name into silence. Then he noticed MJ's necklace. The pendant hung backward, not real. Peter closed his eyes and drove his fist through the illusion. The cafe exploded into smoke. He returned to the tunnel with his arm buried inside the Remnant's chest. The creature shrieked and threw him into Bucky. Nice catch, Bucky muttered, helping him up. The golden circles beneath the city began spinning faster. Strange's voice sharpened through the phone. The vault has 7 anchors. The Remnant has already broken 6. Peter looked toward the final chain of light wrapped around the giant shape below. And the last one? Strange hesitated. It's connected to the strongest memory still holding the spell together. Peter already knew. A screen of black smoke opened before him. MJ stood in the middle of a crowded street, staring upward as the sky cracked apart. Around her, shadow creatures emerged from tears and reality. The Remnant whispered beside Peter's ear. Her memory of you is the final lock. Peter's blood went cold. If she remembers everything, Strange said, the vault opens. And if I erase her memory again? Silence. Then Strange answered. You won't only erase Peter Parker. Peter stared at MJ through the smoke. You'll erase every memory she has. The final golden chain cracked, and MJ screamed his name. The final chain snapped. A shockwave tore through Manhattan. Windows burst outward. Streetlights bent toward the ground. Above the city, the sky opened like broken glass, revealing flashes of other New Yorks layered behind this one. Different towers, different heroes, different Spider-Men falling through endless blue. Peter moved before the fear could stop him. He fired a web into the darkness above and launched himself toward the surface. Bucky caught his shoulder as the tunnel collapsed behind them. Together they shot through a subway entrance and landed in the middle of a street swallowed by panic. Cars had stopped. People ran without knowing where safety was. Shadows climbed from the cracks between buildings, each one wearing a face stolen from someone's memory. At the center of it all stood MJ. She held her head with both hands, staggering as years returned at once. Peter saw recognition spreading across her face. The school trip, the bridge, Mysterio, the broken spell, the promise he never kept. Then she saw him. Not Spider-Man, Peter. Her lips trembled. You came back. The words nearly destroyed him. The Remnant rose behind her, towering above the street. Its body was no longer made of one face. Thousands pushed through its skin. May, Tony, Ned, Happy, people Peter had saved, people he had lost. You cannot have both, it said, the girl or the world. Peter stepped between MJ and the creature. Then take me. The Remnant laughed. I already did. Its chest opened. Inside was Peter's entire life, twisted into a burning core. Every memory the world had lost was wrapped around him like chains. Dr. Strange appeared through a portal above the street, bleeding from the temple. Golden bands snapped from his hands and locked around the Remnant's arms. Peter! He shouted. The core is unstable! Destroy it now! Peter stared into the creature's chest. If he destroyed the core, the stolen memories would vanish forever. MJ would forget him again. Ned too. Everyone. MJ reached for his hand. Her fingers closed around his. I remember, she whispered. I remember you standing outside the cafe. I remember waiting. Peter could not look at her. I was scared. I know. I thought leaving would keep you safe. It didn't. The Remnant broke one of Strange's restraints. The street split beneath them. Bucky fired into the shadow creatures closing from both sides, but there were too many. Strange shouted again. Now, Peter! MJ tightened her grip. Don't choose for me again. Peter finally looked at her. Her eyes were full of anger, pain, and something worse. Hope. That tiny hope hurt more than losing her. The Remnant lunged. Peter pulled MJ close, fired a web around her waist, and threw her toward Bucky. Bucky caught her as Peter launched himself straight into the creature's open chest. Darkness swallowed him. He fell through memories. Tony dying beneath an alien sky. May collapsing in his arms. Ned laughing in a school hallway. MJ kissing him while the world still knew his name. The Remnant whispered from everywhere. Keep them. Peter landed before the burning core. Keep the love. Keep the pain. Let the worlds break. His hands shook. This was everything he had wanted. A life restored. A family returned. No more empty rooms. Then he heard MJ screaming outside. Heard buildings collapsing. Heard Strange losing control of the spell. Peter placed both hands against the core. I loved them enough to let them go once. The darkness tightened around him. Do it again, the Remnant hissed. Peter closed his eyes. No. He pulled the core into his chest. The creature screamed. Every shadow in New York froze. The cracks in the sky stopped spreading. Strange stared in horror as Peter absorbed the forgotten memories instead of destroying them. Pain exploded through him. Millions of lives. Millions of emotions. Every person who had ever known Peter Parker flooded into his mind at once. He screamed until his voice disappeared. The Remnant collapsed inward, dragged into Peter's body piece by piece. The sky sealed. The shadows vanished. Silence fell across Manhattan. Peter dropped from the creature's dissolving form. MJ ran toward him. He landed on his knees. She touched his face. Peter? His eyes opened. They were completely black. A smile slowly crossed his lips. But it wasn't Peter's smile. And when he spoke, 1,000 voices spoke with him. Peter Parker is gone. MJ did not step back. The thing wearing Peter's body rose slowly, black eyes reflecting the ruined street. Dr. Strange lifted both hands, golden symbols forming around his wrists. Bucky aimed at Peter's chest. Neither moved. One wrong strike could kill the boy trapped inside, or release the Remnant again. MJ pressed her palm against Peter's face. No, she whispered. You don't get to take his name. The Remnant smiled. He surrendered it. He sacrificed it. Its smile faltered. MJ moved closer, though every instinct begged her to run. Peter hates raisins. He talks too much when he's nervous. He pretends pain doesn't hurt when everyone can see that it does. Her voice broke. He always thinks leaving is the same as protecting people. Images flickered beneath Peter's skin. A school hallway. A rooftop. Her hand inside his. The Remnant seized her wrist. Bucky fired, but Strange threw the bullet aside with magic. Wait! MJ winced as the creature tightened Peter's fingers around her arm. You remember his life, she said. But you don't understand it. 1,000 voices laughed through him. What is there to understand? Peter always comes back. She placed his hand over her heartbeat. Inside the darkness, Peter heard it. One steady pulse, then another. The millions of stolen memories had buried him beneath their grief, but MJ's heartbeat cut through the noise. He saw her waiting inside the cafe. Ned staring at an empty chair he could not explain. May smiling over a bowl of soup. Not perfect memories? Human ones. Warm, painful, unfinished. Peter opened his eyes inside the remnant. You said memories rot, he whispered, only when nobody carries them. He reached through the darkness and grabbed the creature from within. Outside, his body convulsed. Black smoke burst from his mouth and wrapped around the buildings. Strange cast a containment spell, forming a glowing sphere over the street. The remnant screamed through Peter. If I die, everything returns. Not everything, Strange said. He finally understood what Peter was doing. The original spell had failed because it treated memories like objects, things that could be removed and locked away. Peter was changing the spell. He was separating memory from love. The world did not need to remember his name to carry what he had given it. Strange drove both hands into the air. Golden light passed through the city. Happy forgot Peter's face again, but the loneliness at May's grave softened. Teachers forgot the missing student, yet remembered that someone quiet had once helped others. Ned lost the restored images, but not the courage Peter had awakened in him. MJ held on longest. Her memories faded one by one. The bridge, the rooftop, their first kiss. Tears slipped down her face as each moment dissolved. Peter forced the remnant out of his chest. It emerged as a small, shaking shadow, no longer wearing stolen faces. He held it between both hands while it clawed at him. You'll be alone, it hissed. Peter looked at MJ. She was already forgetting why she was crying. I know. He crushed the shadow. Light swallowed everything. Peter woke at sunrise on the roof of the sanctum. His suit was torn. His body felt hollow, but the dark veins were gone. Bucky stood near the ledge, watching ambulances move through the streets below. Strange sat beside Peter, exhausted. The vault is gone, Strange said. The remnant with it. Peter stared at his hands. Do they remember? Not your identity? Peter swallowed. And MG? Strange's silence answered first. She kept one thing, he said. A feeling the spell couldn't remove. Days later, Peter returned to the cafe. Ned sat near the window. MJ stood behind the counter, wearing the necklace with the pendant facing forward. Peter almost entered. His hand even touched the door. MJ looked up. Their eyes met. No recognition appeared, but she smiled. Not the polite smile she gave strangers. Something quieter. Something that made her touch the necklace without knowing why. Peter smiled back. Then sirens rose in the distance. He stepped away from the door, pulled the mask over his face, and ran toward the alley. A web caught the morning light. He swung above the city as people pointed toward the sky. New York remembered Spider-Man. MJ watched him disappear between the buildings, her chest aching with a loss she could not name, and high above the noise, Peter whispered the name the world had forgotten. This time he did not say it to prove he existed. He said it because he finally knew who he was. The most revealing decision behind Spider-Man, Brand New Day, is not a costume change, a surprise villain, or another universe-shaking cameo. It is the choice of Destin Daniel Cretton. After John Watts directed Tom Holland's first 3 solo adventures, Sony and Marvel handed the 4th film to a filmmaker whose career has consistently focused on people carrying emotional wounds they cannot easily explain. Cretton may now have superhero-sized resources, but his instincts were formed through intimate character dramas. That combination, human vulnerability wrapped inside blockbuster spectacle, makes him a fascinating architect for Peter Parker's loneliest chapter. Cretton's breakthrough, Short-Term 12, followed staff members and teenagers inside a residential care facility, observing trauma through restrained conversations, awkward silences, and tiny gestures. He later directed The Glass Castle and Just Mercy, stories about damaged families, institutional failure, and people struggling to preserve their dignity. Then came Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, where he proved he could handle elaborate action without abandoning emotional intimacy. The film's real conflict was not hero versus monster. It was a son confronting the grief, anger, and expectations inherited from his father. Cretton made spectacle personal. Spider-Man needs exactly that treatment now. No Way Home ended by stripping Peter of almost everything that had defined Holland's version of the character. His aunt was dead. His friends had forgotten him. His connection to the Avengers had effectively vanished. Rather than immediately reversing that tragedy, Brand New Day appears designed to live inside its consequences. The official premise describes Peter fighting crime full-time in a New York that no longer knows his name while watching his former friends continue their lives without him. Even his powers begin changing under the pressure. This is not simply Spider-Man starting another adventure. This is Peter attempting to replace a human life with a heroic identity. That distinction explains why Cretton's appointment feels so deliberate. Spider-Man has always joked while fighting because humor gives him control over fear. But what happens when the jokes are the only voice he has left? A weaker movie could treat Peter's isolation as temporary setup before restoring the familiar supporting cast. Cretton's filmography suggests something more uncomfortable: loneliness as the central dramatic condition. His characters rarely heal through one triumphant speech. They stumble toward connection, retreat from it, then try again. Peter Parker, buried beneath the responsibility of Spider-Man, fits naturally into that emotional world. When the title was announced at CinemaCon in March 2025, Tom Holland described the movie as a fresh start. Cretton went further, saying the team was examining the next stage of Peter's life while obsessing over both the physical experience of web swinging and the creation of an emotional story audiences had not seen before. That balance matters. He was not talking only about bigger action. He was talking about redesigning the sensation of being Spider-Man around a different version of Peter, older, isolated, and forced to decide whether sacrifice has become an excuse for avoiding intimacy. Cretton has also described the film as recognizably Spider-Man while emphasizing a new chapter and a tonal shift. That does not necessarily mean joyless or grim. His work usually mixes pain with warmth, humor, and sudden bursts of energy. Shang-Chi could move from family grief to kinetic bus combat without making either element feel imported from another film. Brand New Day appears to demand the same tonal flexibility: street-level danger, physical transformation, romantic loss, and comic book wonder occupying one story without crushing one another. The challenge is enormous. The potential is even larger. The creative partnership surrounding him is equally important. Sony Pictures and Marvel Studios remain jointly involved, with Kevin Feige, Amy Pascal, Avi Arad, and Rachel O'Connor listed as producers. Chris McKenna and Eric Sommers, writers on Holland's previous Spider-Man films, return for the screenplay. Cretton is therefore not demolishing the established series and rebuilding from nothing. He is inheriting its continuity, humor, and relationships, then redirecting them toward adulthood. That collaborative structure could preserve what audiences love while preventing the fourth installment from feeling like an extended epilogue to No Way Home. And here is the real promise of Cretton's vision. He understands that Peter Parker becomes most compelling when his powers cannot solve his actual problem. He can stop robberies, survive impossible falls, and protect an entire city. None of that can force MJ or Ned to remember him. None of it can teach him how to belong again. Scheduled for theatrical release on July 31, 2026, Brand New Day is being positioned as both continuation and rebirth. Whether that promise survives the machinery of a massive franchise remains unanswered, but the director chosen to guide it understands the essential truth. Before Spider-Man can save New York, Peter Parker must rediscover a reason to live inside it. But vision is only the beginning. Beneath Cretton's emotional approach lies a screenplay that must transform one of Marvel's bleakest endings into the foundation of an entirely new Spider-Man era. A director can establish the emotional destination, but somebody still has to build the road. For Spider-Man, Brand New Day, that road began with Chris McKenna and Eric Sommers, the writing partnership behind all three previous Tom Holland Spider-Man films. Their return offered something valuable: continuity. They understood Peter's comic timing, his relationship with MJ and Ned, and the emotional logic that carried No Way Home toward its devastating final spell. But continuity created the screenplay's greatest danger. How do you honor that ending without immediately undoing it? bring Peter's friends back too quickly, and his sacrifice becomes temporary inconvenience. Keep them absent too long, and the movie risks losing the warmth that made the earlier trilogy breathe. Development was neither quick nor clean. Work on the fourth film was publicly confirmed before the screenplay was ready, then paused during the 2023 Writers Guild strike. Once negotiations resumed, Holland became involved earlier in the creative process than he had been on previous installments. That matters because he was no longer simply receiving Peter Parker's next adventure. He was helping protect the character's direction. Holland repeatedly stressed that he would return only if the story justified continuing after No Way Home. This was not empty actor diplomacy. That ending already functioned as a complete, painful conclusion. Any sequel had to prove that Peter's isolation contained another story rather than merely another franchise obligation. By October 2024, Holland and Zendaya had read a draft together. His response was encouraging but unusually candid. The script excited him, yet still needed work, partly because the story had to fit into the wider MCU timeline. That tension has haunted Marvel storytelling for years. A Spider-Man film must operate as a personal coming-of-age drama, a New York action movie, and a component inside a much larger continuity machine. Too much connective tissue, and Peter becomes a guest in his own film. Too little, and the studio loses opportunities to connect its larger universe. The writing challenge was therefore structural, not cosmetic. The screenplay needed to make the MCU feel like pressure surrounding Peter, not the reason his story exists. The solution appears to begin with a 4-year time jump. Official story material places Peter well into adulthood, living alone and fighting crime full-time after voluntarily removing himself from the memories of everyone he loves. That gap is smart because it avoids spending half the movie watching him adjust to an outcome the audience already understands. We meet him after isolation has hardened into routine. Spider-Man is no longer something Peter balances against school, friendship, or romance. It has swallowed the rest of him. Dramatically, that turns the familiar great responsibility principle inside out. Responsibility was once his moral strength. Now it may be the respectable name he gives to self-erasure. Then the screenplay introduces two mysteries at once. Peter's powers begin undergoing a dangerous physical evolution, while an unseen threat emerges against New York and the people he still loves. The pairing is elegant. One mystery attacks the city, the other attacks Peter's body. He cannot investigate the external danger without confronting the internal change, and he cannot protect his former friends without moving dangerously close to lives he chose to abandon. Holland has described the film as a detective story in which Spider-Man himself spends much of the narrative confused and searching for answers. That shifts the engine away from simply defeating a visible supervillain. Peter must observe, investigate, and doubt his own senses. For a hero defined by spider-sense, uncertainty becomes its own form of terror. A later revision adds another intriguing layer. In June 2026, it was reported that Justin Kuritzkis, writer of Challengers and Queer, had revised McKenna and Sommer's screenplay and would receive a writing credit. Kuritzkis specializes in desire expressed through conflict, characters who say one thing while emotionally demanding another. That sensibility could sharpen Peter's encounters with MJ, Ned, and anyone attempting to enter his sealed-off life. The superhero mechanics may belong to McKenna and Sommer's established vocabulary, but Kuritzkis brings an instinct for relationships that behave like contests. Every conversation can become a struggle between what Peter wants, what he believes he deserves, and what he refuses to admit. The screenplay's strongest idea, at least from what has officially been disclosed, is that Peter's sacrifice did not finish his development. It interrupted it. He saved the world, protected his friends, and accepted total loneliness. But survival is not the same as growth. Brand New Day appears built around the consequences of turning one noble decision into a permanent lifestyle. That gives the story somewhere meaningful to go without betraying No Way Home. Peter does not need to learn responsibility again. He needs to learn that responsibility without connection can become punishment. And once that emotional blueprint was finally in place, the filmmakers faced the next defining question. Who could enter Peter's empty world, without making it feel familiar again? Who could enter Peter Parker's empty world without making it feel familiar again? The official billing offers a revealing answer. Tom Holland, Zendaya, Sadie Sink, Jacob Batalon, John Bernthal, Tremel Tillman, Michael Mando, and Mark Ruffalo. That is not the cast of another high school Spider-Man comedy. It mixes emotional history, street-level brutality, unresolved villainy, and full-scale superhero power. The choices point in competing directions on purpose. Peter is being pulled toward the people he lost, the criminals he failed to finish dealing with, and older heroes whose methods could shape or corrupt the adult he is becoming. Holland's return was essential, but the version of him being cast is different from the teenager Marvel, hired more than a decade earlier. He now carries the audience's memory of 3 solo films, multiple Avengers appearances, and Peter's complete emotional collapse at the end of No Way Home. That history cannot be replicated through exposition. It lives in Holland's face. Casting him again means asking the actor to preserve the nervous energy and physical lightness of his younger performance while showing what years of anonymous responsibility have taken from Peter. Same body, heavier soul. That contradiction will define whether the new beginning feels earned. Bringing Zendaya and Jacob Batalon back is an even more delicate decision. MJ and Ned cannot simply resume their original functions as Peter's romantic partner and comic best friend because neither remembers him. Their presence therefore creates emotional tension before either character says a word. Peter knows their rhythms, fears, and private histories. To them, he may be little more than a stranger standing too close. The casting preserves the trilogy's emotional continuity while removing the comfort that continuity once provided. Zendaya and Batalon are not returning merely to restore nostalgia. They are returning to make absence visible. Sadie Sink became the ensemble's great unanswered question when her casting was reported in March 2025. Her character remained undisclosed, allowing months of theories to multiply around Jean Grey, Mary Jane variants, and several Spider-Man comic figures. The smarter detail is how she was hired. Sink later said she received the role without auditioning and did not initially possess the full script. That suggests the filmmakers were selecting a quality rather than simply filling a recognizable costume. Sink's work in Stranger Things and The Whale proves she can project anger, grief, and vulnerability almost simultaneously. Whatever name the character carries, the casting signals emotional weight. Then comes John Bernthal as Frank Castle, the Punisher, a choice that immediately roughens the film's edges. Bernthal's Castle does not treat violence as acrobatic problem-solving. He enters a room like a threat that has already made its decision. Placing him beside Holland creates a philosophical collision between 2 masked men shaped by loss, but divided by what they permit themselves to do afterward. There is also a satisfying history behind the pairing. While filming Pilgrimage, Bernthal helped Holland record material for his original Spider-Man audition while preparing his own Marvel audition. Years later, they meet again as heroes whose moral codes could not be further apart. Mark Ruffalo's inclusion introduces a different kind of pressure. Bruce Banner can understand Peter's physical transformation in ways almost nobody else can, while Hulk represents the terrifying possibility that power may overwhelm identity. Ruffalo's casting reportedly firmed up as the screenplay developed, implying that Banner was not added only to continue the tradition of giving Holland a famous MCU partner. He appears structurally connected to Peter's crisis. Robert Downey Jr.'s Tony Stark offered mentorship. Benedict Cumberbatch's Doctor Strange offered access to dangerous solutions. Ruffalo can offer recognition, the uncomfortable gaze of someone who knows what it means to fear his own body. Michael Mando's return may be the most satisfying long-term casting decision. Mac Gargan was introduced in Spider-Man, Homecoming, scarred during the ferry confrontation, and last seen demanding Spider-Man's identity from Adrian Toomes. The character then disappeared for nearly 9 years. Bringing Mando back transforms an abandoned thread into accumulated resentment. His intensity in Better Call Saul made Menace feel watchful rather than theatrical. He can threaten Peter without competing for volume. A villain who remembers being humiliated by Spider-Man becomes especially dangerous when the world has forgotten the man beneath the mask. Tremel Tillman completes the central billing as another deliberately guarded addition. After Severance, he arrives with an extraordinary ability to make politeness feel like surveillance. Warm smile, controlled voice, danger underneath. Whether ally, authority figure, or antagonist, that energy belongs naturally in a story about a hero whose identity has been erased. The ensemble has been built around contrasts. Holland's openness against Bernthal's severity, Ruffalo's exhaustion, Mando's resentment, Sink's guarded intensity, and Tillman's unnerving control. On paper, the casting works, but names and reputations only create possibility. The real test begins when these actors occupy the same frame, and Holland must carry a Peter Parker who no longer has anyone left to perform normality for. Tom Holland's greatest challenge in Brand New Day is not performing grief. He already proved he could do that when Peter lost Aunt May and pleaded with Doctor Strange to erase him from the world's memory. The harder task is playing what comes afterward. Grief that has stopped looking dramatic because it has become routine. 4 years have passed, Peter lives entirely alone, and Spider-Man has consumed the space once occupied by friendship, school, and romance. The trailers do not present a man constantly collapsing. They present someone functioning too efficiently. Holland's job is to make that competence feel dangerous. The behavior of a young man who has converted emotional avoidance into public service. That marks a sharp evolution from Holland's earliest interpretation. In Homecoming, Peter's body seemed permanently ahead of his thoughts. He bounced, interrupted people, and filled silence because adolescence made stillness unbearable. The older Peter glimpsed here appears more economical. His posture is tighter, his expressions linger before resolving. Even beneath the mask, the vocal energy feels less like a teenager enjoying his powers and more like a worker enduring another shift. Same agility, different emotional rhythm. Spider-Man may move faster than ever, but Peter looks stuck. Holland has said audiences wanted a more relatable Spider-Man story, less about saving the world and more about Peter possibly saving himself. That idea gives the actor a cleaner, dramatic objective than another escalating multiverse emergency. Peter's external battles can now expose an internal problem. He does not know where Spider-Man ends and the discarded civilian begins. Holland has always been strongest when enthusiasm collides with panic. Here, the collision changes. Duty meets exhaustion. Humor meets repression. Every joke has the potential to sound like Peter, checking whether he can still imitate the person he used to be. The physical transformation described in the official synopsis gives Holland another acting layer. His body is not merely a weapon under his control. It is becoming unfamiliar, possibly threatening his existence. Holland's dance and gymnastics background has always made his Spider-Man unusually expressive in motion. He folds into landings, twists through narrow spaces, and gives even digital action a recognizable physical personality. Brand New Day can turn that fluency against him. A movement that begins with confidence can finish with hesitation. A hand can shake. A landing can feel too forceful. The body that once liberated Peter may become the first thing to betray him. Zendaya faces the opposite challenge. She must play MJ without access to the emotional history that shaped the previous films, while allowing the audience to feel that history whenever Peter looks at her. She cannot perform hidden recognition unless the screenplay gives MJ a reason to suspect something. Doing so would weaken the spell's consequence. Instead, her power lies in independence. Zendaya said she imagined the years MJ had lived without Peter and even helped adjust scenes so the adult version retained the character's oddness and dry humor. That re-MJ-ifying process matters. Growth should not sand away specificity. MJ can mature without turning into a generic romantic memory waiting to be restored. Their chemistries must therefore become intentionally uneven. Holland carries intimacy into every encounter because Peter remembers everything. Zendaya must answer with the guarded curiosity one might offer a stranger who behaves as though a private conversation has already begun. That imbalance could produce the film's most painful moments. He knows when she is nervous. She does not know why he notices. He remembers promises she never made. Romance becomes dramatic irony, but not the playful kind. The audience occupies Peter's side of a relationship that only exists for one participant. John Bernthal gives Holland a completely different scene partner. Their off-screen friendship allowed Destin Daniel Cretton to encourage improvisation, creating what Holland described as a bickering, older brother-younger brother dynamic between Peter and Frank Castle. That looseness could be crucial. Bernthal performs pressure by reducing movement. Holland releases pressure by accelerating it. Frank stares. Peter talks. Frank advances in straight lines. Peter circles physically and verbally, searching for another option. Their contrast should create humor, but beneath it sits a serious question. Is Peter's isolation pushing him closer to Frank's worldview? Holland's performance will ultimately succeed or fail in the moments between those relationships. Around MJ, Peter must conceal love. Around Frank, he must defend mercy. Around Bruce Banner, he may have to admit fear of his own body. The role demands action star precision, romantic restraint, and the emotional nakedness of someone who cannot confess what has been taken from him. Holland has played Spider-Man as eager, frightened, love-struck, and devastated. Brand New Day asks for something quieter. A Peter Parker who appears fully formed while privately disappearing. Yet no lead performance survives in isolation. Holland may carry the film's emotional burden, but the people surrounding Peter will determine whether that burden feels intimate, threatening, or unexpectedly funny. And this ensemble contains more than one actor capable of stealing the entire scene. The most important supporting performance in Brand New Day may belong to someone who no longer knows he is supporting Peter Parker at all. Jacob Batalon's Ned Leeds once functioned as Peter's safest emotional space. The friend who knew the secret, shared the excitement, and absorbed fear through humor. Now that history survives only inside Peter and the audience. Ned has moved into adulthood without him, leaving Batalon to play an apparently complete person whose missing relationship remains painfully obvious to everyone watching. That is a strange, dramatic assignment. He must preserve Ned's recognizable warmth while refusing the familiarity that previously made every interaction with Peter effortless. Batalon's comic timing has always depended on sincerity. Ned rarely behaves as though he knows he is delivering the joke. He reacts with the open enthusiasm of someone incapable of hiding what he feels. In the earlier trilogy, that quality prevented the increasingly complicated mythology from crushing Peter's ordinary life. Here, it can serve a harsher purpose. A laugh from Ned may remind Peter of what has been lost rather than provide relief. The chemistry between Holland and Batalon must feel both natural and blocked. Two performers carrying years of shared rhythm, while one character remains emotionally locked outside it. Sadie Sink enters with none of that established history. Her character's identity remains officially undisclosed, making her presence valuable precisely because the audience cannot immediately organize her around Peter's past. Sink has described joining a cast that already possessed years of personal and professional familiarity, yet interviews with Holland, Zendaya, and Batalon present her as part of the group rather than an isolated addition. That off-screen comfort could help prevent the character from feeling like a mechanical replacement for MJ or Ned. She does not need to occupy an abandoned position. She needs to disturb the shape of Peter's new life. Sink's screen persona makes that disruption promising. She can project defensiveness without closing herself emotionally, allowing suspicion, anger, and vulnerability to overlap. In Stranger Things, her strongest moments often arrived when Max attempted to appear self-contained, while grief leaked through the performance anyway. That quality belongs naturally beside this Peter Parker. Both could appear determined to survive without help, creating either immediate recognition or immediate conflict. The trailers reveal too little to judge the final dynamic, but the casting suggests that Peter will encounter someone who cannot be won over through charm alone. John Bernthal supplies the ensemble's blunt force. Holland has described Peter and Frank Castle as possessing a combative older brother-younger brother energy, developed partly through improvisation encouraged by Destin Daniel Cretton. That relationship could give the movie its roughest humor. Bernthal's intensity becomes funny when placed against Holland's verbal speed because Frank treats every disagreement as deadly serious, while Peter keeps searching for a moral argument that might slow him down. Beneath the bickering, however, sits genuine danger. Frank is what grief looks like when punishment replaces responsibility. Peter may recognize more of himself there than he wants to admit. Mark Ruffalo offers a quieter counterweight. Bruce Banner understands isolation, physical transformation, and the fear that heroic power can erase the person carrying it. The official material confirms Ruffalo among the principal cast, while the premise centers on Peter, undergoing a bodily evolution that threatens his existence. That combination makes Bruce potentially more than the film's designated veteran Avenger. His usefulness lies in experience. Tony Stark once encouraged Peter to become a hero worthy of his gifts. Bruce may be the person forced to explain that gifts can also become illnesses, prisons, or identities that demand constant negotiation. Michael Mando's return as Mac Gargan creates another form of continuity. Gargan was introduced in Homecoming, then left waiting through the rest of the trilogy, while Peter encountered threats of increasingly cosmic scale. Restoring him now pulls the series back toward unfinished street-level consequences. Mando's tightly controlled menace makes Gargan useful inside an ensemble crowded with physically powerful personalities. He does not need to outshout the Hulk or the Punisher. Resentment can do the work. Peter has spent years suffering because the world forgot him. Gargan represents someone whose hatred survived the disappearance of Peter Parker because it was directed at Spider-Man. Trammell Tillman introduces a different energy, immaculate control. His work in Severance showed how a calm voice and welcoming expression can become more unsettling than obvious aggression. With his brand New Day role still guarded in official publicity, the most useful analysis lies in what his casting brings tonally. Tillman can make authority feel impossible to read. In a detective-driven story built around hidden motives and Peter's growing uncertainty, that ambiguity matters. He could stand beside Peter, oppose him, or do both within the same conversation. And Tillman's restraint would keep the character dangerous without announcing which direction the scene is moving. The ensemble's real strength is contrast. Batalon carries forgotten affection. Sync introduces unreadable possibility. Bernthal turns trauma into violence, Ruffalo turns it into wary self-knowledge, Mando turns it into revenge, and Tillman wraps uncertainty inside composure. Cretton has described an inclusive set atmosphere, while Zendaya observed that the returning cast's family-like comfort extended to the new collaborators. That chemistry cannot guarantee a successful movie, but it gives the supporting players room to challenge Holland rather than orbit him, and those performances will not exist in empty space. Peter's isolation, New York's escalating pressure, and the collision between street crime and superhuman danger must all be made physically visible, which places the next burden on the artists constructing the film's environments, costumes and battered new world. Peter Parker's new life must look as though it was assembled without help. No Stark laboratory, no automated suit generator, no luxurious school trip carrying him across Europe. The visual promise of Brand New Day begins with subtraction, stripping away the polished infrastructure that surrounded Holland's Spider-Man and placing him back among cramped rooms, crowded streets, and objects that appear physically handled. Production designer Charles Wood and costume designer Sanja Milkovich-Hayes both arrived with extensive Marvel experience, but their task was not simply maintaining continuity. They had to make a billion-dollar superhero film feel handmade again. The new Spider-Man costume expresses that idea immediately. Its bright red and deep blue return Peter toward the character's classical comic book silhouette, while raised black webbing and a larger chest emblem give the material more visible texture. Earlier MCU suits often appeared sleek enough to belong inside Tony Stark's inventory. This one looks more like an object Peter could understand, repair, and emotionally claim. The design follows the homemade suit glimpsed at the end of No Way Home, but develops it into something sturdier and more practical. It is not merely nostalgic. It visually declares independence. Holland's involvement in developing the costume makes that symbolism even stronger. Peter has been forgotten by the people who once helped define him, so his suit becomes one of the few identities he can still construct deliberately. The enlarged spider emblem reads almost like self-persuasion. If Peter Parker has disappeared, Spider-Man must become unmistakable. Yet the traditional design also carries traces of the alternate Peters he met in No Way Home. He may be alone, but his clothing quietly remembers the brothers the universe forced him to lose. Heritage stitched into fabric. That is, production design doing character work before dialogue begins. The film's location strategy pushes the same philosophy beyond the costume. Principal photography began on the streets of Glasgow, where sections of the city were transformed to stand in for New York. Holland had publicly welcomed a return to location shooting after pandemic restrictions confined much of No Way Home to controlled soundstage environments. Released behind-the-scenes footage shows him performing around an armored vehicle in an actual city street, while spectators watch from behind the production barriers. The difference is tactile. Buildings possess depth. Pavement reflects real weather. The surrounding world does not stop at the edge of an LED wall. Glasgow is not New York, of course, which makes Wood's challenge more interesting. Production design must disguise one city without bleaching away everything that makes streets feel inhabited. Storefronts, traffic markings, vehicles, signage, and layers of urban debris all have to agree with one another. Miss one element and the illusion breaks. Get them right, and the location provides something a soundstage struggles to reproduce. Visual accidents. A stained wall. Uneven stonework. Windows catching light at different angles. New York should not feel built for Spider-Man's entrance. It should feel indifferent to him. That indifference matters because Peter is now anonymous even when unmasked. His civilian environment should communicate impermanence. A modest apartment, practical possessions, and little evidence that another person shares his space. The earlier trilogy surrounded him with visual reminders of relationships. School lockers, May's home, Ned's bedroom, Happy's technology. Brand New Day can make loneliness visible through empty chairs, unfinished repairs, and rooms organized around survival rather than comfort. The smallest props may carry the largest emotional burden. A sewing machine or damaged mask would tell us more about his daily life than another digital display ever could. The wider costume palette creates equally useful contrasts. Punisher's militarized clothing belongs to utility and intimidation. Bruce Banner traditionally dresses like a man trying not to attract attention. MJ and Ned can wear the confident, individualized clothing of adults whose lives continued without Peter. Place those figures beside Spider-Man's saturated red and blue, and Peter becomes visually conspicuous yet personally invisible. Everyone sees the hero. Nobody recognizes the man. That contradiction is the film's entire premise compressed into wardrobe. The danger is excess. With armored vehicles, multiple superhuman characters, and a threat capable of transforming Peter physically, the production could still abandon its grounded texture once the action escalates. Practical streets mean little if every surface is later buried beneath weightless digital destruction. The most promising released material understands this. Spider-Man clings to metal, tears at physical machinery, and occupies recognizable public space. The environment resists him. That resistance gives his strength scale, because power feels more convincing when it interacts with objects that possess apparent mass. Brand New Day therefore appears to be constructing two worlds at once. The heroic New York that sees Spider-Man everywhere, and the private New York in which Peter Parker barely exists. Wood's environments and Hayes' costumes must keep those worlds visually connected, without allowing either to consume the other. The suit makes him iconic. The apartment makes him human. The streets force both identities into collision. But physical design only establishes what stands before the camera. The next transformation occurs through lenses, lighting, and movement, where those tangible streets must finally become Spider-Man's visual language. The most encouraging cinematography decision in Brand New Day is not a rumored camera or an expensive new visual effects technique. It is Brett Pawlak standing behind the camera. Company 3 officially credits Pawlak as director of photography, alongside editor Nat Sanders and senior finishing artist Tom Poole. Pawlak and Destin Daniel Cretton developed their visual instincts together long before either entered superhero filmmaking. Discussing Short Term 12, Pawlak described their shared style as organic and deliberately resistant to calling attention to itself. That philosophy sounds almost rebellious inside a franchise built around impossible movement. Spider-Man attracts spectacle automatically. Pollack's task is making sure the spectacle never erases Peter. Superhero cinematography frequently treats scale as the ultimate goal. The camera races through buildings, dives between traffic, and spins around digital bodies until movement becomes the subject. Pollack's earlier work suggests a different priority: emotional proximity. The most effective version of Brand New Day will not simply show how fast Spider-Man travels. It will preserve the sensation of a human body being pulled through dangerous space. Keep the horizon readable. Let buildings retain weight. Hold a fraction longer when Peter collides with steel or lands badly. Speed becomes exciting only when the audience understands what could stop it. Marvel's official behind-the-scenes material confirms that the opening action sequence was filmed on city streets, while Sony has positioned the movie as a fresh chapter centered on an adult Peter living alone. Location photography gives Pollack something computer-generated environments struggle to manufacture consistently: resistance. Pavement reflects imperfectly. Sunlight changes across glass. Background movement refuses to behave like decoration. Those details can give Spider-Man's motion a believable reference point, especially when practical footage and visual effects occupy the same shot. The city should not appear to move around the hero. He should appear to fight his way through it. Daylight could become one of the film's strongest visual weapons. Darkness can conceal the joins between physical photography and digital construction. Bright streets expose everything. Texture, shadow direction, and the apparent weight of Spider-Man's body must agree. That difficulty is precisely why daytime action can feel exhilarating when handled well. Red and blue cut sharply against concrete, steel, and weathered architecture. The costume becomes a moving graphic shape without losing its fabric texture. Spider-Man should look iconic from a distance and vulnerable whenever the camera closes the gap. Peter's private scenes require the opposite visual language. His apartment and civilian life should not be photographed with the same restless momentum as his patrols. Still frames, obstructed compositions, and empty space can make his isolation physical. Place Peter at the edge rather than the center. Let doorways divide him from other people. Hold wide enough for the audience to notice how little exists around him. Then, when MJ or Ned enters the frame, closeness itself becomes emotionally threatening. The camera does not need to announce Peter's loneliness. It can simply leave room where another person used to stand. Pollack's handheld experience also needs discipline here. Handheld cinematography, where the camera carries slight human movement, can create immediacy, but constant shaking quickly becomes visual noise. Used selectively, it could distinguish Peter's emotional states. A controlled camera when he operates confidently as Spider-Man. Subtle instability when his changing powers begin frightening him. Complete stillness when he confronts someone he cannot afford to remember aloud. The technique works only when movement has meaning. Otherwise, it becomes style searching for emotion rather than emotion determining style. Nat Sanders' editing will be equally important because Spider-Man action depends on continuity more than raw speed. A successful sequence lets viewers understand three things instantly: where Peter is, what he wants, and what will happen if he fails. Rapid cutting can intensify those facts, but it cannot replace them. Sanders must preserve Pollack's spatial information while allowing sudden accelerations to feel genuinely sudden. The best cuts will follow intention rather than impact. Peter sees danger, chooses a path, then commits his body. That tiny chain of cause and effect is what separates thrilling action from expensive confusion. Company 3's confirmed finishing and visual effects credits also point to an extensive digital pipeline, though the complete technical package has not been officially detailed. That missing information matters. Before release, precise claims about lenses, sensor formats, or shot construction would be speculations disguised as expertise. The finished film must be judged by what appears on screen, not by impressive equipment names. Pollack's real challenge is coherence. Practical streets, digital swinging, intimate close-ups, and superhuman destruction must feel as though they belong to one emotional world. If he succeeds, the camera will move differently depending on which identity is winning. Spider-Man flies. Peter hesitates. And somewhere between those two rhythms, the film finds its visual heartbeat. But images create only half of that heartbeat. Every web line, passing train, strained breath, and moment of silence must give those movements weight. And the film's next invisible storyteller will be its sound. Spider-Man's movement is almost silent by nature. Webbing leaves the wrist, the body lifts, and gravity briefly loses its authority. Cinema has to invent the rest. The snap of each web line, wind cutting around the mask, fabric tightening during a turn, those sounds transform impossible motion into something the body understands. For Brand New Day, that sonic illusion carries additional weight because Peter's powers are no longer completely trustworthy. Every familiar sound can begin normally, then bend into something wrong. A web fires with too much force. A landing ends with an unfamiliar crack. The city keeps roaring while Peter pauses, wondering whether the danger came from outside or from within him. Michael Giacchino's return gives the film an invaluable musical memory. He scored all 3 previous MCU Spider-Man films, developing a central theme that matured alongside Holland's Peter, from youthful enthusiasm toward the grief and sacrifice of No Way Home. Brand New Day becomes his 4th score in the series, despite the change from John Watts to Destin Daniel Cretton behind the camera. That continuity means Giacchino does not need to manufacture a new musical identity from nothing. He can take a melody audiences associate with Peter's friendships, mistakes, and victories, then ask what remains after the people connected to those memories have forgotten him. A preview piece titled Sweet New Day has already indicated the broad direction. The music retains recognizable traces of Giacchino's established Spider-Man language while using heavier orchestration and electronic textures to create a more mature, forward-driving sound. It does not discard the younger Peter. It sounds as though that optimism has been reinforced with harder material. The effect fits a hero who has survived enough to move with confidence, but not enough to move without pain. The theme rises. Something underneath it grinds. That tension may become the score's defining emotional contradiction. The smartest approach would resist playing Peter's original theme in its complete heroic form too early. A melody can behave like memory. A few notes surface, reach toward resolution, then disappear before finding home. Place that incomplete motif beneath Peter, watching MJ or Ned from a distance, and the music can remember on their behalf. They hear nothing unusual. Peter hears the life he surrendered. When the full theme eventually arrives, it should not accompany his largest punch or highest swing. It should mark the moment he chooses to become a person again, allowing heroism to mean connection rather than endless self-denial. His physical evolution demands a second musical language. The official premise describes the transformation as something that threatens Peter's existence, which gives Giacchino room to corrupt the familiar theme from inside, rather than attaching a simple villain motif to it. Strings could climb beyond comfortable pitch. Electronic pulses could interrupt the orchestra like signals from an invading nervous system. A familiar brass phrase might return in altered harmony, close enough to recognize but wrong enough to unsettle. Peter would still sound like Spider-Man, just not entirely. The most frightening musical choice would be making the threat feel inseparable from the hero's own melody. Frank Castle should alter the soundscape through subtraction. Punisher action does not need soaring orchestration. It needs mechanisms, magazine clicks, boots against concrete, distant sirens, and the brutally compressed impact of firearms inside enclosed spaces. Spider-Man's action traditionally feels elastic. Frank's feels terminal. When they occupy one sequence, their sounds can argue before their dialogue does. Peter's webs stretch and redirect force. Frank's weapons send force directly through whatever stands ahead. One improvises, one executes. The contrast turns sound design into moral characterization. Bruce Banner introduces another possibility: sonic restraint built around anticipated eruption. The Hulk does not need to appear for his presence to be felt. A room can quiet whenever Banner loses control of his breathing. Low frequencies can emerge beneath ordinary conversation, barely audible but physically sensed through theater speakers. That is where modern sound mixing becomes psychological. Bass is not only loudness, it is pressure. The audience feels a transformation approaching before the image confirms it, mirroring Peter's fear that his own body may contain an event he cannot prevent. New York itself must remain the film's largest instrument. Traffic, elevated trains, construction, conversations, and emergency vehicles should crowd Peter constantly, yet his isolation becomes clearest when that noise suddenly falls away. Imagine him seeing MJ across a street. The city dulls, Giacchino's melody enters through only 2 or 3 notes, and then a horn or passing train tears the moment apart. Silence here should never feel empty. It should feel stolen, brief pockets in which Peter can hear everything he has spent years refusing to confront. The final mix must hold these competing identities together: orchestral heroism, electronic transformation, street-level violence, and intimate silence. Overload would flatten them. Precision will separate them. Spider-Man should sound airborne, Punisher brutally grounded, Banner dangerously contained, and Peter almost unbearably alone. Giacchino's theme supplies the emotional history, but the surrounding sound design determines whether that history feels comforting or haunted. And building that layered audio world required more than composition. It depended on location recording, stunt coordination, visual effects timing, and a production forced to combine public street work with the secrecy of one of Marvel's most closely watched sequels, the human and logistical struggle waiting behind every finished frame. The most sobering moment in the production of Spider-Man. Brand New Day arrived on September 19, 2025, when Tom Holland suffered a mild concussion while filming and production temporarily stopped. For a movie designed to make Spider-Man's action feel physical again, the incident exposed the uncomfortable reality beneath that ambition. Superhero movies may finish their images with digital doubles, computer-generated environments, and invisible safety systems, but human bodies still absorb the risk. Holland was treated and given time to recover, with filming paused because the production could not simply work around its leading actor. The interruption lasted roughly a week and was not expected to alter the July 31, 2026 release date. Months before that setback, the production had already committed itself to a more exposed style of filmmaking. Holland described Brand New Day as a return to old-school location work after COVID restrictions forced much of No Way Home onto controlled stages. Principal photography began in Scotland in early August 2025, with Glasgow streets transformed into sections of New York. That choice immediately changed the atmosphere surrounding the movie. Instead of hiding Spider-Man's return behind studio walls, the filmmakers launched it in public, with crowds watching stunt performers, armored vehicles, and practical action unfold across real city blocks. The secrecy remained. The filmmaking itself became visible. Glasgow provided more than architecture. It supplied unpredictability, weather shifts, reflections change, crowds gather behind barriers. A production working in the middle of a functioning city must coordinate traffic control, businesses, public access, pyrotechnics, and hundreds of crew movements while preserving the illusion that the location is Manhattan. The released behind-the-scenes material confirms that the opening action sequence was photographed on actual streets, with Holland describing the experience as a return to the spirit of homecoming. That comparison matters. The first Holland film felt energetic, partly because Peter occupied recognizable neighborhoods rather than a permanently expanding digital battlefield. Brand New Day appears determined to recover some of that texture. The stunt philosophy reinforces that intention. Members of the Jackie Chan stunt team, who previously collaborated with Destin Daniel Cretton on Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, worked on the film's action. Jackie Chan himself visited the London production and explained that Cretton was excited to see him because the director was already working closely with Chan's team. Their approach traditionally treats action as a chain of readable physical decisions rather than a cloud of movement. The audience sees the setup, understands the danger, and feels the impact. For Spider-Man, that could mean fights built around environmental improvisation, webs, walls, vehicles, and momentum, rather than characters exchanging anonymous digital blows. Holland is unusually suited to that method. His background in gymnastics and dance allows him to contribute a recognizable rhythm even when a stunt double or digital element completes the movement. Yet Brand New Day also demonstrates why enthusiasm needs boundaries. His September concussion was a genuine production disruption, not a colorful anecdote to romanticize. After receiving medical care, Holland indicated that he was recovering, and filming resumed once the production had reassessed its schedule. The best result would be action that feels dangerous, without requiring its performers to be endangered. Spectacle only looks effortless because planning, rehearsal, and safety coordination work to conceal the labor beneath it. That labor continued across studio and location environments in England after the Glasgow work. Pinewood Studios provided the controlled space needed for interiors, effects-heavy sequences, and action elements impossible to manage safely on public roads. The production therefore operated through a deliberate contrast, tangible urban exteriors paired with soundstage work built for precision. This is not a battle between practical filmmaking and visual effects. Modern Spider-Man movies require both. The real craft lies in deciding where one should surrender to the other. A physical vehicle gives actors something to strike and climb. Digital extension can then enlarge the danger without removing the contact that makes it believable. John Bernthal's involvement added another continuity problem behind the scenes. Frank Castle had to feel consistent with the Punisher audiences already knew, even while entering the faster, more elastic world of a Spider-Man film. Bernthal emphasized that preserving the character's identity mattered to him, Holland and Cretton. That concern likely shaped the action as much as the dialogue. Punisher violence cannot suddenly become harmless superhero choreography simply because Spider-Man stands nearby. Frank's methods must retain their severity, while Peter's intervention prevents the movie from adopting Frank's morality. Coordinating those two physical languages, one direct and lethal, the other improvisational and protective, requires stunt design that understands character rather than merely impact. Cretton's production style appears to have depended heavily on trust. He entered the project after Holland had played Spider-Man under multiple directors and across several enormous productions. Yet the actor was also more creatively involved than before. Cretton reportedly encouraged Holland and Bernthal to improvise their argumentative dynamic, allowing their real friendship to produce the feeling of two combative brothers. That flexibility is revealing. A tightly controlled blockbuster can still create room for actors to discover behavior, provided the director knows which parts of the machinery must remain fixed and which can breathe. The explosions may require exact timing. The human friction between them does not. Filming finally wrapped on December 19, 2025, more than 4 months after the production began in Scotland. Cretton called it the largest and most rewarding filmmaking experience of his career, thanking the crew and praising Holland's fearlessness, work ethic, and leadership. Holland, in turn, described the shoot as an exceptionally fulfilling creative experience. Those comments do not guarantee a successful finished film. Wrap Day emotion has never been a reliable review, but they point toward a production whose central relationship held together through public scrutiny. Complex location work and an unexpected shutdown. That matters when the director is inheriting one of modern cinema's most closely watched characters. The production story of Brand New Day is therefore less about one miraculous improvisation or a disastrous behind-the-scenes feud than about restoring physicality to a franchise increasingly associated with digital scale. Real streets, carefully designed collisions, an injury that reminded everyone of the cost, a recovery that allowed the work to continue. By December, Cretton and Holland had completed the raw material. The next test would be commercial rather than physical. Could a more isolated, street-focused Spider-Man generate financial expectations comparable to the multiversal phenomenon that came before it? The most important box office number attached to Spider-Man, Brand New Day, is currently 0. Not because interest is weak, but because the film does not begin its wide domestic release until July 31, 2026, with several international markets opening from July 29. Any worldwide total, profitability claim, or victory celebration published before then is prediction dressed as history. The film has sold tickets and generated tracking data, but it has not earned an opening weekend. That distinction matters. Hype measures intention. Box office measures whether intention survived reviews, schedules, ticket prices, and the simple decision to leave home. The expectations are enormous. Box Office Pro's July 10 forecast placed the domestic opening between $230 million and $250 million, potentially making it the biggest opening of 2026. Its tracking panel reported strong initial pre-sales and upward momentum, while still expecting the film to land below the extraordinary $260.1 million debut of No Way Home. Even the lower end of that forecast would place Brand New Day far above the openings of Homecoming, which began with $117 million, and Far From Home, whose unusual Tuesday release produced a $92.5 million traditional weekend. That is not normal sequel growth. That is event film territory. But comparisons with No Way Home can become unfair almost instantly. That film united Tom Holland, Tobey Maguire, and Andrew Garfield while bringing back villains from several generations of Spider-Man movies. It was not marketed merely as the conclusion of one trilogy. It became a theatrical reunion spanning nearly 20 years of audience memory, eventually reaching approximately $1.92 billion worldwide. Brand New Day is selling something less obviously explosive, the continuation of Holland's Peter after everyone forgot him. One film promised multiversal recognition. The other promises emotional reconstruction. Matching the earlier phenomenon would be remarkable. Failing to match it would not automatically mean failure. The more useful comparison may be the Holland series before that multiversal surge. Homecoming finished with roughly $879 million worldwide, while Far From Home climbed to approximately $1.13 billion. Those films proved that Holland's Spider-Man could operate as a global theatrical attraction without requiring 3 cinematic Spider-Men in the same frame. Brand New Day now tests whether the audience's attachment to this specific Peter has strengthened enough to support a massive opening built around consequence rather than reunion. The trailers may feature Hulk, Punisher, and returning villains, but Holland's wounded version of Peter remains the commercial product at the center. Sony's end-of-July positioning is strategically aggressive. Instead of opening near the beginning of the month like Homecoming and Far From Home, the film arrives as the final giant release of the summer corridor, giving it the comparatively quieter weeks of August in which to hold screens and encourage repeat viewing. Box Office Pro compared that opportunity to Deadpool and Wolverine, which opened with $211. $4 million domestically in late July 2024 and finished with $636.7 million in North America. The opening gets the headline. August endurance creates the larger story. That endurance will depend heavily on audience response. A front-loaded debut driven by fans can still collapse if casual viewers hear that the movie is confusing, emotionally hollow, or overloaded with franchise setup. The reported 150-minute running time creates another commercial tension. A longer movie can feel substantial and encourage event-level anticipation, but it also gives theaters fewer opportunities to schedule each auditorium during a day. The length will become an asset only if audiences feel those 2.5 hours move. If the story drags, every minute becomes visible. The production budget has not been publicly confirmed through the financial databases available before release, making any precise break-even declaration premature. Marketing costs, exhibitor shares, and international revenue splits further complicate the easy internet formula that simply doubles a reported budget. What can be said is that this production carries expensive obligations: location shooting, extensive effects, a large cast, and a global advertising campaign. A huge opening may establish safety, but genuine profitability will depend on the film's complete theatrical run and later revenue from home entertainment, licensing, and streaming. There is also a wider industry burden attached to those numbers. Recent franchise releases have produced uneven results, leaving theaters hungry for a late summer event capable of turning advance excitement into sustained attendance. Box Office Pro explicitly framed Brand New Day as a potential boost for cinemas after a difficult July for familiar intellectual property. Spider-Man is not merely being asked to outperform competing superheroes. He is being asked to prove that audiences are not exhausted by the genre itself, only by superhero films that give them insufficient reason to care. So the film's commercial verdict cannot yet be written. The forecast is huge. The presale momentum is real. The historical comparisons are intimidating. Yet the number that will matter most may not be opening weekend at all. It will be the second weekend drop, when curiosity has been satisfied and word of mouth begins making decisions for everyone else. Brand New Day can open because Spider-Man is famous. It can endure only if Peter Parker's loneliness connects. And that question leads directly beyond dollars. Before the box office can reveal whether audiences returned, critics and viewers must decide whether this supposed new beginning actually deserves the name. The most accurate review of Spider-Man, Brand New Day, currently consists of 3 letters, TBD. As of July 13, 2026, Metacritic lists no professional reviews, no Metascore, and no audience rating, while Rotten Tomatoes has trailers and promotional features, but no published tomatometer score. The film does not officially open in the United States until July 31. That makes every circulating declaration that it is a masterpiece, disaster, or franchise savior premature. Test screening rumors may generate irresistible headlines, but anonymous applause is not criticism. Until reviewers can discuss the completed film under normal publication conditions, the genuine critical verdict has not begun. What does exist is a remarkably intense conversation around the film's direction. The first official trailer introduced an adult Peter living alone 4 years after No Way Home, fighting crime full-time while undergoing a dangerous physical evolution. That material shifted discussion away from whether Tobey Maguire or Andrew Garfield might appear and toward a more interesting question. What has continuous self-sacrifice done to Holland's Peter? The trailer's appeal came from consequence. Peter did not appear conveniently restored after the previous film's ending. He looked trapped inside it. For viewers who wanted the spell and Aunt May's death to matter, that was the right first signal. The visual marketing has also been received as a promise of a more street-level Spider-Man. Real locations, a traditional red and blue suit, and footage emphasizing physical collisions have encouraged comparisons with the simpler neighborhood energy of Homecoming. Rotten Tomatoes' promotional lineup even includes features centered on practical production and giving audiences a street-level hero. Yet the phrase street level is already under pressure. Punisher belongs naturally in that world. Hulk does not. Add Peter's transformation, several possible villains, and continuing speculation about larger MCU connections, and the supposedly smaller film begins looking crowded. The audience wants intimacy, but the studio still appears tempted by scale. That tension defines much of the pre-release debate. Some viewers see Hulk and Punisher as ideal mirrors for Peter, 2 men whose bodies' basketball grief have produced radically different relationships with violence. Others see another Marvel sequel surrounding Spider-Man with famous guest characters, because the studio does not trust him to carry his own film. Both reactions are understandable. The earlier Holland trilogy repeatedly paired Peter with established MCU figures, from Tony Stark to Nick Fury and Doctor Strange. Brand New Day has marketed itself as Peter finally standing alone, so every crossover immediately raises suspicion. The film must prove these characters expose Peter's conflict rather than distract from it. The title carries its own cultural baggage. Marvel's original Brand New Day comics followed the controversial status quo reset of One More Day, restoring Peter's secret identity and sending him into a back-to-basics period featuring new friends, enemies, and shorter adventures. Marvel now describes that era as a new lease on life and a jumping-on point, but many readers still associate the surrounding reset with the erasure of Peter and Mary Jane's marriage. The movie is not advertised as a direct adaptation, yet the title naturally alarms fans who fear another reversal of character development. After No Way Home removed Peter from MJ's memory, the parallel is impossible to ignore. Then there is Sadie Sink's unidentified role, which has turned the marketing campaign into an uncontrolled theory generator. Speculation has connected her to mutants, Jean Grey, and several Spider-Man characters, while the trailer's emphasis on Peter's changing biology has intensified discussion about whether the film is quietly preparing the MCU's mutant future. None of those interpretations should be treated as confirmed. Still, they demonstrate Marvel marketing's favorite cultural trick: conceal one name and let the audience perform months of free publicity. The risk is that viewers may become more invested in solving the casting puzzle than understanding the character once she appears. The second trailer and ticket launch accelerated that speculation rather than closing it. New footage strengthened interest in Peter's transformation, his confrontations with larger heroes, and the possibility of returning street-level enemies. Recent television spots have triggered further theories around Hulk and equipment resembling Shocker's technology. That sort of frame-by-frame investigation keeps the movie visible, but it also creates expectation inflation. Every glove becomes a villain confirmation. Every background figure becomes a cameo. Every unfinished effects shot becomes evidence of either genius or catastrophe. The modern superhero movie is culturally judged in fragments months before anyone experiences its rhythm as a complete story. The strongest anxiety has little to do with one casting rumor. It concerns Marvel itself. Brand New Day arrives carrying expectations that a more emotionally grounded Spider-Man can cut through audience fatigue with interconnected superhero storytelling. Viewers do not appear tired of Peter Parker. The enormous anticipation suggests the opposite. They are tired of stories that feel like advertisements for future stories. This film must end with emotional consequence, not merely a doorway into the next crossover. A reference to the wider universe can enrich Peter's isolation. A finale designed primarily to arrange another franchise event would shrink him inside his own rebirth. So the pre-release reception is hopeful, suspicious, and deeply protective. Audiences like the classical suit, the lonely Peter, and the promise of tangible New York action. They are intrigued by Punisher, unsettled by the transformation, and fascinated by the hidden roles. But enthusiasm comes with conditions. Do not erase No Way Home. Do not replace emotion with cameos. Do not call the story street level and then bury it beneath universe management. The trailers have successfully convinced people that Peter Parker matters again. The film must now prove that its creators believe the same thing. Only after July 31 will scores, reviews, and audience debates give that anticipation a measurable shape. Until then, Brand New Day exists as possibility. Perhaps the beginning of Holland's richest Spider-Man era. Perhaps another overfilled Marvel junction. The final judgment must wait. The deeper thematic question cannot. After sacrificing his place in everyone else's life, can Peter Parker build a new identity without repeating the same cycle of loneliness? Peter Parker has spent most of his cinematic life learning that power creates responsibility. Brand New Day appears ready to ask the more difficult question: when does responsibility become self-destruction? The official premise finds Peter fighting crime full-time in a city that no longer knows his name, watching his former friends move forward without him. He has not merely accepted loneliness as the price of heroism. He has organized his entire existence around it. That makes the film's central threat larger than an invisible villain or a dangerous physical transformation. Peter may have begun believing that disappearing is the purest form of love. SunnyPictures.com, that belief contains enough truth to become dangerous. Peter protected MJ and Ned by leaving them alone. He prevented his enemies from using them against him. He honored the terrible choice made at the end of No Way Home. But a sacrifice can be morally necessary in one moment and emotionally poisonous when repeated forever. Peter has turned a crisis decision into a permanent identity. Every night spent behind the mask confirms the same conclusion. Spider-Man deserves to exist. Peter Parker does not. This is where the movie could move beyond familiar superhero psychology. The hero's problem is not that he fears responsibility. He may love responsibility because it gives his pain somewhere respectable to hide. The title sharpens that contradiction. Marvel's comic book Brand New Day era restored Spider-Man's secret identity and pushed Peter toward a back-to-basics life involving new friends, new enemies, and familiar faces. It was promoted as a fresh jumping-on point, but it emerged from One More Day, the deeply controversial story in which Peter and Mary Jane's marriage was erased from continuity. The movie is not advertised as a direct adaptation, yet the thematic resemblance is unavoidable. Peter's public identity has been erased, His romantic history has been severed, and the narrative promises renewal through loss. That creates the film's most important moral test. Will it treat erasure as liberation, or will it confront the cruelty buried inside the reset? Peter should not receive his old life back simply because audiences miss it. That would cheapen his sacrifice. But the story must also reject the idea that suffering automatically makes him noble. Pain is not character development by itself. The growth comes from what Peter chooses after pain. Whether he risks telling the truth, allows another person to help him, or accepts that protecting people does not require deciding their lives for them forever. MJ embodies that dilemma. Peter remembers a complete relationship she never experienced. He may believe staying away respects her freedom, yet he is still making the decision alone. The tragic beauty of their situation lies in the conflict between memory and consent. His love is genuine. Her ignorance is genuine too. Brand New Day must resist turning MJ into a prize waiting for Peter to restore the correct timeline. She needs the right to become someone outside his memory of her. Love in this story should not mean recovering possession of the past. It should mean meeting another person as she is now, even when doing so hurts. The physical evolution threatening Peter's existence gives that emotional conflict a body. Marvel's official synopsis confirms that the pressure surrounding Spider-Man produces a surprising transformation, while Sony describes it as something Peter may not have the power to control. Read symbolically, his body is doing what his mind refuses to do, changing under accumulated pressure. Peter has compressed grief, fear, and desire beneath constant activity. Now the repression becomes visible. He cannot simply swing faster or punch harder because the battlefield is himself. The hero who controls every fall may finally confront something he cannot catch. That is why Bruce Banner and Frank Castle make such useful thematic mirrors. Bruce lives with a second physical identity that can overwhelm the first. Frank has allowed grief to become an endless mission. Peter stands between them. One warns what happens when power separates from selfhood. The other warns what happens when pain becomes purpose. Neither man offers a complete answer. Bruce's restraint can become isolation. Frank's certainty can become brutality. Peter must find a third path, in which responsibility does not demand either suppression or vengeance. The invisible villain described by Sony could extend the same idea outward. An enemy nobody can see forces Peter to question perception, instinct, and trust. More importantly, invisibility reflects his own social condition. Peter moves through New York as someone erased from meaningful recognition. Spider-Man is visible everywhere, on screens, in headlines, above the streets, while the person inside the suit has almost ceased to exist. Heroism has made him publicly unavoidable and privately absent. That contradiction is pure Spider-Man, adored as an image, misunderstood as a person. The film's legacy will depend on whether it protects that intimacy once the spectacle expands. Hulk-sized action, multiple villains, and wider MCU connections can serve Peter's journey, but they cannot become substitutes for it. The strongest Spider-Man stories make impossible danger feel personal. A collapsing building matters because someone Peter loves is inside. A villain matters because his choices expose something Peter fears within himself. A crossover matters only when it changes the character standing at the center. Should Brand New Day conclude mainly by arranging another franchise event, its emotional promises will feel borrowed. Should it conclude with Peter choosing human connection despite its risks, the film could justify every explosion surrounding him. Destin Daniel Cretton therefore carries an opportunity larger than restarting a successful series. He can redefine adulthood for Holland's Spider-Man. Earlier films asked whether Peter was ready to become an Avenger, inherit technology, or survive without mentorship. This one appears to ask whether he can build a life that is not measured only by what he gives up. Growing older should not mean becoming endlessly harder. It should mean recognizing limits, accepting uncertainty, and understanding that needing people is not a heroic failure. The only honest verdict before release is that Spider-Man, Brand New Day, is promising, not proven. Its foundation is strong. A lonely Peter, a classical visual identity, physical action, and a conflict rooted in the consequences of No Way Home. Its dangers are equally visible: overcrowding, crossover dependence, and the temptation to reverse painful choices for easy applause. The finished film will decide which instinct wins when it opens on July 31, 2026. But its potential final message already feels clear. Peter Parker does not need another lesson about sacrificing himself. He has mastered that lesson so completely that it is destroying him. His real challenge is learning that a new day is not created by forgetting yesterday, replacing old relationships, or hiding forever behind responsibility. It begins when he accepts that being human, messy, vulnerable, connected, and known is not the weakness Spider-Man must overcome. It is the reason Spider-Man exists.